For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. 14th century proverb. Good evening. It is 8:04 p.m. on the 25th of March, 2023, and these are the Tobin Time Travel Talks. Usually in physics, whenever we want to solve a problem, we'll make some approximations and simplifications. Maybe we'll ignore air resistance, or we'll assume that the object we're working with is perfectly spherical, or that the temperature of the system is completely uniform, or there's no curvature to space-time, etc., etc. And usually, if these approximations are well-formed and appropriate to the situation, we can still get pretty close to the correct answer while having vastly simpler calculations. And then when we add in back all those specifics and recompose a fully complex system, really that's just going to give us a more precise answer. Except when it doesn't. Today we're going to be talking about chaos. Chaos theory is the branch of math and science that deals with systems that are very sensitive to starting conditions. In fact, they're so sensitive that their outcomes become essentially unpredictable based on human abilities to measure and calculate the system. They're apparently random. The earliest mathematical indication that the universe could be inherently unpredictable was with Henri Poincaré's work on the three-body problem. The three-body problem asks for the motion of three bodies in motion, all gravitationally attracted to each other. The problem is notoriously messy and does not have a general analytic solution, meaning it can't be solved just with equations. I actually ran a simulation to get the data to do that stupid keynote animation there. Anyways, most of the early scientific work on chaos theory is related to the meteorological research of Edward Lorenz. In 1961, Lorenz was running some weather simulations, and he wanted to double-check some data. So he punched his numbers into the system to run his simulation again, and it spat out some wildly different outcomes. The culprit, he discovered, was that he had rounded his input when he put it in the second time around. Apparently, he had used 3-digit precision instead of 6-digit and punched in the number 0.506 instead of 0.506127. This almost imperceptible change in input led to a completely different result. Now, to be clear, chaotic systems are still perfectly deterministic. If you can measure with perfect accuracy and calculate with total precision, you can determine exactly what's going to happen. But two starting points that differ imperceptibly even could still evolve in completely different patterns. Effectively, the only way to know how a system's going to be is to have perfect knowledge of how it is. And that's just not possible. And remember when we were talking about infinity? Measuring with total precision in a continuum, measuring something exactly, can't happen. This leads to what we perceive to be randomness. However, there's no true randomness in chaos. It's just systems we don't perfectly understand. Historically, there have actually been several unrelated references to butterflies in the development of chaos theory. In Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder, the future is changed when some time travelers step on a butterfly in the past. Strange attractors, which mathematically map chaotic behavior, kind of look like butterfly wings. But perhaps the main reason that chaos theory's signature feature is called the butterfly effect is because of Edward Lorenz's own research. You see, the change that he made to the initial conditions in his calculations was likened to a bird or an insect flapping its wings, with the outcome of the calculations being that they've completely altered the weather pattern of the planet forever. This whole idea crystallized in a paper he presented at a meeting in 1972 entitled "Does the Flap of a Butterfly's Wings in Brazil Set Off a Tornado in Texas?" Formal chaos theory deals with events of near periodicity, strange attractors, interconnectedness, and various other mathematical jargon. But we're going to focus on the concept behind the butterfly effect, And remember this because we're going to be referencing it so much. Small changes to initial conditions can lead to large, unpredictable changes in outcome. Now, admittedly, small, large, and initial can be subjective terms. Chaos is often characterized by a constrained system's lack of patterns, but that's really analytic and kind of abstract. So we're going to look at an example that Lorenz used for chaos. Dropping a marble onto a pegboard, like a simplified version of pinball or pachinko. By dropping the marble onto a peg, it will bounce around from peg to peg while dropping down the board in this trajectory. Now, if we drop it again from the same location, we might get a completely different trajectory. We can see that these two marbles start the same, but imperceptible changes in the initial position are multiplied at each junction. After the first peg, they follow similar trajectories, but after the second peg, we can see the black trajectory takes a higher arc. They still land close to one another, but it's far enough apart that the red one is fired off to a completely different peg. From there, the systems are just completely out of each other's ranges. Now, we should probably establish how we can characterize these differences in outcome. If we broadly categorize the end states like a pachinko board, there are 5 columns that the marbles could exit from. So there are 5 general states that the marble could end in. With pachinko, usually where the ball lands corresponds to a particular prize. So we could label each of these bins with some dollar amount. Now, since there's only 5 possible outcomes, it's possible that chaos doesn't clearly change the outcome at all. If we drop 50 marbles, chances are that 10 of them will land in the exact same bin as either of the first 2 marbles. The actual distribution is a bit more mathematically complicated, but we're going to approximate here. And that's just if we split the outcome into 5 categories. Chaos isn't going to change the fact that the marble's going to drop out the bottom of the board, for example. Marble's not going to fly out the side. In that respect, there's really only one possible outcome state. On the other hand, there are infinite variations in the velocity and the precise exit location of the ball. If we care about those, then there are infinite outcomes to this system. So, depending on the forces at work, chaos could change everything, or it can change nothing. And it could change anything in between. It really depends on the results that we're looking for. Now, marbles are kind of an artificial example here, both because you're only going to see a game like this when you intentionally go out to play one, and because it's literally an item that was artificially made to give random results. When we think about time travel, we think about the chaos of humans. If our behavior is affected by a ball bouncing one way or another, or a leaf blowing this direction, or just by our own observations of a chaotic system, well, then we're being affected by that chaotic system. And that makes humans chaotic too. Humans are chaos machines. That I probably shouldn't come as a surprise. So let's look at some minor events of human history then. Stop me if you've heard this one before. On June 28, 1914, Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip fails to assassinate Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and he stops for a sandwich on Franz Josef Street in Sarajevo. Meanwhile, Franz Ferdinand's driver turns him down the wrong street after the aforementioned failed assassination attempt. This leads Ferdinand down the same street to cross paths with Princip, giving him a second chance at that assassination that he had tried earlier, this time resulting in success. These two apparently inconsequential events, Princip stopping for a sandwich and Ferdinand taking a wrong turn, led to World War I, which led to World War II, which basically shaped the entire 20th century. All because one guy wanted a sandwich and one guy turned down the wrong street. The World War I powder keg is a very common historical example of the butterfly effect. Unfortunately, there's very little veracity to the story of Princip stopping for a sandwich. This particular story is just apocrypha. They didn't even eat sandwiches in Bosnia at the time. Now, the accuracy of that sandwich story doesn't actually make this a poor example of the butterfly effect. You see, chaos isn't just about how one minor event can snowball into something bigger. It's about how every minor event can snowball into something bigger. Every event in Princip's life led to him being on that street corner where he shot the Archduke. Perhaps if he was never expelled from school, or if he had never joined the Young Bosnia organization, he would never have been there to kill Franz Ferdinand and ignite World War I. Or maybe he still would have killed the Archduke, even if some of those events were changed. Maybe someone else would have done it in his place. Maybe World War I and World War II would have happened even if he was excised from all these preceding events. The whole problem is that life is so complicated that we have no way of predicting what would and wouldn't have happened. More fundamentally, the fact that each human is conceived from one of several million sperm cells means that changing the time of conception by even a few seconds could completely change the human produced by it. If you simply talk to Princip's parents for a minute, even about something completely inconsequential, you could prevent him from being born entirely. And in erasing him from existence, you erase everything he ever did, just by talking to his parents for 1 minute. If you intentionally introduce randomness to a system, that divergence can grow even more quickly from a single event. Consider maybe whether you go to college versus trade school on the flip of a coin. This one chaotic event completely changes the course of your life. I mean, you can try and flip that coin the exact same way every time, but unless you've got some special coin flipping skill, then you're never going to be able to guarantee that outcome. If you want to produce a chaotic random number, maybe consider starting a stopwatch and then stopping it and just counting whatever the very last digit is. If your stopwatch goes to milliseconds, there's no way that you can predictably get the same number of milliseconds on each click. So by now, you should be starting to see how chaos relates to time travel. One way of looking at time travel is that it's a way of changing the initial conditions in the past. And these starting conditions can lead to unpredictable futures. What if you go back in time and run into a hungry guy who asks if he should have a sandwich or a salad? Perhaps by telling him to get that salad, you've prevented World War I. Or maybe he'd just go get a salad from the exact same restaurant, so he'd still be there to shoot the guy and you wouldn't have changed anything. Or maybe you're talking to the wrong guy entirely and it doesn't matter what you tell him. Or maybe you're talking to a different guy who, in telling him to get a sandwich, actually causes World War III. In short, it's impossible to replicate past conditions, and impossible to tailor them to be exactly what you want. The simple act of appearing in the past is enough of a perturbation to lead to any number of outcomes, even before taking a step outside of your time machine. Okay, now that you know everything there is to know about chaos, and the fact that there's no such thing as randomness, join us next time for when we talk about randomness, i.e., real, true randomness, quantum mechanics. So that brings us to the end of today's lesson. If you want to support the series, or if you're ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of time travel, consider purchasing the Chronoversal Compendium on Amazon, or follow the Ingram Spark link in the description for a special discount on the hardcover. There's also some Chronarch Butterfly merch available on TeePublic and Redbubble. That's all for now. See you yesterday.